Have you ever dreamed of moving into the perfect house? The kind with a big yard, a white picket fence, and plenty of room for your family to grow. That's exactly what the Miller family thought they'd found. John, Sarah, and their 2 kids, Emily and little Lily, were ecstatic. It was a fresh start, a dream come true. But some dreams, as they would soon discover, can turn into absolute nightmares. The first few weeks were idyllic, unpacking boxes, painting walls, filling the rooms with laughter. It was perfect. Then, the first letter arrived. It was in a plain white envelope, with no return address. John opened it, thinking it was a welcome note from a neighbor. But the words inside sent a chill down his spine. It read, "Welcome to my house. I've been watching you." The letter was signed simply, "The Watcher." They tried to brush it off as a sick prank, maybe some local kids with a twisted sense of humor. But then another letter came. This one was more detailed, more unnerving. It described things only someone inside the house would know. It mentioned the color Sarah painted the living room, the lullaby she sang to Lily at night, even the spot where Emily hid her diary. The Watcher knew everything. Panic began to set in. The dream home was starting to feel like a prison. John went to the police, but they were skeptical. A few creepy letters. There wasn't much they could do. They advised installing a security system, which John did immediately. Cameras were placed everywhere, covering every angle of the property. For a few days, there was silence, and the Millers dared to hope it was over. But the Watcher was smarter than that. The third letter appeared on the kitchen counter, right next to the coffee machine. There was no sign of a break. The doors were locked, the windows were shut, the alarm was on. How did it get there? This letter was different. It wasn't just watching, it was warning. It spoke of the house's history, of the families that had lived there before. It said the house had a thirst and that it chooses who stays. The letter ended with a terrifying sentence. The house wants young blood, and it has chosen. John and Sarah were terrified. They started researching the property's history, and what they found was horrifying. The public records were clean, but digging deeper into old town archives and newspaper clippings, they uncovered a dark pattern. Every family that had lived in that house over the last century had met with a tragic end. Accidents, disappearances, families turning on each other. It was a cycle of misery, and they were next. They decided they had to leave. They packed their bags in a frenzy, ready to abandon the house and everything in it. But as they were about to walk out the door, little Lily started crying. Not just crying, but screaming. She refused to leave. She kept pointing back into the house, saying, "He doesn't want us to go. The house will be sad." John and Sarah's blood ran cold. The house wasn't just a place anymore. It was an entity, and it had somehow connected with their youngest daughter. Desperate, they contacted a paranormal investigator, a woman named Elena, who specialized in haunted properties. Elena arrived and immediately felt the oppressive energy. As she walked through the rooms, she explained that some places hold on to the energy of past events, creating a consciousness of their own. This house, she said, was one of the strongest she'd ever encountered. It fed on fear and sorrow, and it had latched onto Lily's innocent energy. The Watcher, Elena theorized, wasn't a person stalking them from the outside. The Watcher was the house itself. It was communicating its desires, its intentions, through the letters. But how were they getting inside? The mystery deepened, becoming more tangled and terrifying with each passing day. The house was playing a game with them, a game they couldn't possibly win. The final letter confirmed their worst fears. It wasn't on the counter or in the mailbox. It was clutched in little Lily's hand as she slept. John gently pried it from her fingers. The handwriting was shaky, almost childlike, but the message was pure evil. "You cannot leave. She is mine now. She will speak for me." Lily had become the new messenger for the Watcher. The house had claimed her. The dream was over. The perfect home had become a living tomb, and the entity within it had taken their daughter's soul as its own. They were trapped, not by walls and doors, but by a malevolent force that wanted them to stay forever. Another family to feed its unending hunger. And every night, they could hear faint whispers coming from Lily's room, the voice of the house, planning its next move. So next time you see that perfect house for sale, just remember the Miller family. Sometimes the most beautiful places hide the darkest secrets. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoy stories that will keep you up at night, make sure to subscribe for more. Stay safe out there. Sarah. Chen was 16 years old when her parents decided she was finally mature enough to spend a weekend alone at their family's rural farmhouse in Blackwood County. The property had been in her mother's family for 4 generations, sprawling, isolated homestead surrounded by cornfields that stretched to the horizon in every direction. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away, and cell service was spotty at best. "You'll have Max for company," her mother said, gesturing to their German shepherd, who wagged his tail from the back seat of the car. "And the landline works fine. We'll be back Sunday evening." Sarah wasn't worried. She had been begging for this opportunity for years, a chance to prove her independence. To have the house to herself, to do absolutely nothing without anyone looking over her shoulder. She watched her parents' car disappear down the long gravel driveway, then turned to Max with a grin. "Just you and me, buddy." The first day passed without incident. Sarah binge-watched horror movies on the ancient television in the living room, ate cereal for dinner, and stayed up past midnight reading by flashlight just because she could. Max slept on the floor beside her bed, as he always did, his warm presence a comfort in the creaking old house. It was the second night when things began to go wrong. Sarah woke at 2:47 a.m. to the sound of dripping. Slow, rhythmic, persistent like a leaky faucet somewhere in the house. She lay in the darkness, listening, trying to identify the source. The bathroom was down the hall, the kitchen was downstairs. The sound seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Drip, drip, drip. She reached down toward the floor, letting her hand dangle over the side of the bed. Max's rough tongue licked her fingers, once, twice, 3 times, and she relaxed. Everything was fine. Max was there. She was safe, but the dripping continued. Sarah pulled her hand back under the covers and tried to sleep, but the sound wouldn't let her rest. It seemed to be getting louder, more insistent, as if the source was moving closer. She lay rigid in the darkness, eyes wide, ears straining. Drip, drip. At 3:15 a.m., she finally gathered the courage to investigate. She swung her legs over the side of the bed, her feet touching the cold wooden floor, and reached down to pat Max's head before standing. Her hand touched empty space. Sarah froze. She could have sworn Max was right there. He had licked her hand just 20 minutes ago. She fumbled for her phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping it across the floor beside her bed. "No, Max." A cold knot formed in her stomach. "Max," she called softly. "Max, where are you, boy?" The dripping continued. It was louder now, and Sarah realized with growing horror that it was coming from the bathroom down the hall. The door was closed. She remembered closing it before bed, but thin strips of light leaked from beneath it, and shadows moved within those strips. Someone had turned on the bathroom light. Sarah wanted to run. Every instinct in her body screamed at her to flee down the stairs, out the front door, into the cornfields where she could disappear into the darkness. But Max was somewhere in this house, and she couldn't leave him behind. She crept down the hallway, her bare feet silent on the worn floorboards, her phone's flashlight cutting a thin beam through the shadows. The dripping grew louder with each step. Drip, drip, she reached the bathroom door and placed her trembling hand on the knob. The metal was ice cold, far colder than it should have been on a summer night. She took a deep breath, turned the knob, and pushed the door open. The smell hit her first copper and iron and something else, something organic and wrong. Then her flashlight beam found the bathtub, and Sarah's mind simply stopped processing what she was seeing. Max was in the tub. What was left of Max? His body had been arranged carefully, almost reverently, with his paws crossed over his chest like a sleeping child. His throat had been cut, and blood dripped from the edge of the tub in slow, rhythmic drops that splashed against the tile floor. Drip, drip. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the message written on the bathroom mirror in Max's blood, each letter dripping crimson streams down the glass. "Humans can lick too." Sarah screamed. She screamed until her throat was raw, until she had no breath left, until she collapsed against the bathroom doorframe and silled to the floor. And in the silence that followed her screams, she heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps climbing the stairs from the first floor. Each footfall was accompanied by a soft, wet sound, like someone licking their lips. Sarah scrambled to her feet and ran to her bedroom, slamming and locking the door behind her. She grabbed the landline phone from her nightstand and dialed 911 with shaking hands. 911, what's your emergency? Someone's in my house, Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. They killed my dog. They're coming up the stairs. Please, please help me. Ma'am, I need you to stay calm. I'm dispatching officers to your location right now. Can you tell me your address? Sarah recited the address, her eyes fixed on the thin strip of light beneath her bedroom door. The footsteps had stopped at the top of the stairs. She could hear breathing, now slow, ragged breathing, like someone savoring a moment. Ma'am, are you still there? Yes, Sarah breathed. I can hear them outside my door. Officers are on their way. Stay on the line with me. Can you describe any? The bedroom door exploded inward, ripped from its hinges by an impact that should have been impossible. Sarah dropped the phone and screamed again, but the sound was cut short when she saw what was standing in the doorway. It was human-shaped, but wrong too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at angles that made no anatomical sense. Its face was obscured by shadows. But Sarah could see its mouth clearly, a gaping maw filled with too many teeth, with a tongue that was impossibly long and impossibly red and impossibly wet. I've been under your bed for 3 nights, it said, and its voice was like sandpaper scraping against bone. Your hand tasted sweet. The phone on the floor continued to emit the 911 operator's increasingly frantic voice. Ma'am, can you hear me? Officers are 5 minutes away, ma'am. Sarah tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The creature moved faster than anything that size should be able to move, and its tongue, that horrible, dripping tongue, wrapped around her ankle before she had taken 2 steps. When the police arrived 7 minutes later, they found the bedroom door torn from its hinges and blood on the walls. They found the bathroom with its grim message still dripping on the mirror. They found paw prints in the blood that led from the tub to the front door and disappeared into the cornfields. But they never found Sarah Chen. The farmhouse has been abandoned ever since. Locals avoid the property, and the Cora fields have grown wild, swallowing the gravel driveway and creeping up to the porch steps. Sometimes, on quiet summer nights, people claim they can hear dripping coming from somewhere inside the house. And sometimes, if you're very unlucky, you might see a shape moving through the cornfields, something tall and thin and wrong, with a tongue that drags behind it through the dirt. Marcus Williams had lived in the small Ohio town of Millfield his entire 23 years, but he had never climbed the steps of Hollow Hill Cemetery. Everyone in town knew the legend, knew about the ancient caretaker's ghost who appeared at the top of the 100 steps, knew about the visions of death he supposedly showed to those brave or foolish enough to make the climb. But Marcus didn't believe in ghosts. He was a graduate student in psychology, working on a thesis about the persistence of supernatural beliefs in rural American communities. Hollow Hill Cemetery was going to be his case study, and he was going to document exactly what happened when someone climbed those steps and nothing supernatural occurred. He arrived at the cemetery at midnight on a moonless October night, equipped with a video camera, a digital voice recorder, and the smug certainty of a man who had never truly been afraid of anything in his life. The cemetery was older than the town itself. collection of weathered headstones and crumbling mausoleums that dated back to the Civil War era. It sat atop a steep hill, accessible only by a narrow stone staircase that wound through thick clusters of ancient oak trees. The steps themselves were worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, and many were cracked or tilted at dangerous angles. Marcus started the climb at 12:07 a.m., counting each step aloud for the camera. Step 1, Step 2, Step 3. The first 30 steps were unremarkable. The trees pressed close on either side, their branches blocking what little starlight filtered through the clouds. But Marcus's flashlight cut a bright path through the darkness. Step 31, Step 32. At Step 40, the temperature dropped noticeably. Marcus could see his breath misting in front of his face, even though it had been a mild evening when he arrived. He told himself it was just the elevation, just the trees blocking the wind. Step 45, Step 46. At Step 50, he heard the first sound, a soft grinding noise, like stone scraping against stone. He paused, sweeping his flashlight through the trees, but saw nothing. Step 51. The grinding sound came again, closer this time. Marcus's heart was beating faster now, but he forced himself to continue. This was exactly the kind of atmospheric effect that created belief in the supernatural darkness, isolation, ambiguous sounds that the brain interpreted as threatening. Step 60. His flashlight flickered. Marcus stopped and shook it, and the beam steadied. When he looked up, there was someone standing on the steps above him. It was an old man, impossibly old, with a face like crumpled parchment and eyes that reflected the flashlight beam like a cat's. He wore a groundskeeper's uniform that looked like it had been in fashion since the 19th century, and he held a rusted shovel in one gnarled hand. "You're counting," the old man said, and his voice sounded like it was coming from very far away. "That's good. Counting is important." Marcus's camera was still recording. He kept it pointed at the figure, determined to document this encounter, even as his hands trembled. "Who are you?" he asked. "I've been the caretaker here for a very long time," the old man said. "Since before your great-grandfather was born, since before this town had a name. I watch over the dead, and sometimes when visitors come, I show them things." "What kinds of things?" The old man smiled, and his teeth were wrong to numerous, too sharp, arranged in rows like a shark's. "Would you like to see how you're going to die, Marcus Williams?" Marcus's blood ran cold. He hadn't introduced himself. He hadn't told anyone he was coming here tonight. "How do you know my name?" "I know everyone's name," the caretaker said. "Everyone who will ever climb these steps. I knew your name before you were born. I knew you would come here tonight, asking questions, seeking proof. And I know exactly how your story ends." The old man descended the steps, toward Marcus, not walking, but gliding, his feet never quite touching the worn stone. As he drew closer, Marcus saw that his uniform was stained with something dark and wet, and that his hands, the hands gripping that rusted shovel, were covered in dirt and what looked horribly like dried blood. "Stop," Marcus said, backing down a step. "Stay away from me." "You climbed 59 steps, the caretaker said. "If you want to leave safely, you need to go back down. You need to count each step. If the number matches, if there are exactly 59 steps back to the bottom, you can go home. You can live. You can forget any of this ever happened. And if the number doesn't match," the caretaker's smile widened, revealing more and more of those shark-like teeth, "then you belong to the hill. Then I show you what I've been waiting to show you since before you were born." Marcus turned and fled. He counted as he ran, his flashlight beam bouncing wildly off the trees and stones, his breath coming in ragged gasps. 59, 58, 57. The steps seemed longer going, down steeper. His feet kept slipping on the worn surfaces, and twice he nearly fell. 43, 42, 41. Behind him, he could hear the caretaker following that horrible grinding sound of the shovel dragging against stone. 30, 29, 28. The trees were pressing closer now, their branches reaching for him like grasping hands. Marcus's flashlight was growing dimmer, its beam barely penetrating the darkness. 15, 14, 13. He was almost there. He could see the bottom of the staircase, could see the iron gate that marked the cemetery entrance. Just a few more steps. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Marcus stumbled off the final step and collapsed onto the grass, gasping for air. He had made it. The count had matched. He was safe. But when he looked back at the staircase, the caretaker was standing at the bottom, directly in front of him, as if he had been there all along. "You miscounted," the old man said, and his voice was almost gentle. "No," Marcus whispered. "No," I counted. 59 down, 59 up. The numbers matched. "You started counting at step 59, the caretaker said. But you stopped at step 60. You took an extra step while you were talking to me. The count doesn't match anymore, Marcus. The count hasn't matched for a very long time." Marcus looked down at his feet and realized, with dawning horror, that he was unstanding on grass anymore. He was standing on a freshly dug grave, a rectangular hole in the earth, 6 feet long and 3 feet wide, with a simple wooden coffin visible at the bottom. "Would you like to see how you're going to die?" the caretaker asked, raising his shovel. Marcus screamed, but there was no one to hear him. The cemetery was empty except for the dead, and the dead had been waiting for him for a very, very long time. The next morning, hikers found Marcus Williams's camera at the bottom of Hollow Hill Cemetery's stone staircase. The memory card was corrupted beyond recovery, but forensic specialists managed to extract one final image, a blurry photograph of something standing on the steps above, holding what appeared to be a shovel. Marcus's body was never found, but sometimes, on moonless October nights, visitors to Hollow Hill Cemetery claim they can hear someone counting from somewhere on the darkened stairs, a voice that stops at 59, pauses, and then begins again from the beginning, over and over, forever.